Yeah.
Oh, you just killed me. Look at that. So, I am real thankful. I want to talk about something that's a little bit different today. We are in the holiday season. In the church, we call it Advent. And as you see, we have our Advent candles lit, and the first candle is the candle of joy. This is a season where we talk about joy to the world, for the Lord has come. It is a time where many of us celebrate. We look forward to being with our families, so on and so forth. It is a time of gift giving, gift receiving, caroling, and so many things. In other words, it is the most wonderful time of year. But how many of us know it is also a tough time of year for many? Amen. But while there are a lot of people with joy, there are a lot of people that are experiencing sadness. And much of that sadness often has to do with grief.
Yes.
And so I just want to share a couple thoughts from today on ways that we can handle grief during the holiday season. Ways that we can handle grief during the holiday season. One of the ways that we can handle grief during the season, and I'd say the first one is just recognize grief when it occurs. Recognize it when it occurs. Grief is simply our response to the loss of something. It can be the passing of a loved one. It can be the passing of a pet. It can be the loss of a job. It can be a change in health. It can be a conflict with a friend. It can be a loss of a treasure or an item or something that we value. Grief is simply a response to loss. Now, Kubler-Ross likes to say that there are 5 stages of grief, and those are denial, anger, sadness, bargaining, and acceptance. Denial means, that loss didn't really happen. Yes, my mother passed away, but that doesn't really affect me. If I lost my job, everything's going to be okay. You're trying to act cool about something. Anger is that thing where you're just a little upset on the inside. You want to snap at somebody. You're snapping at your kids because you're really feeling grief, or you're snapping at your spouse because you're upset that you lost your job or something like that. Sadness is that point where you're depressed, where you're feeling down, or when you're different things like that. Bargaining is that thing we like to do. It's like, okay, Lord, I'm losing my health, but if you restore my health, I'll serve you. If you get me from this cancer diagnosis, I promise I'll treat everybody well. Lord, if you give me a new job, I'll promise I will provide for the sick, the needy, or so forth. It's those bargaining things that we do. And then there's the point of acceptance where we learn to rest in that. Now, the interesting thing about all 5 of those stages is they aren't linear. As a chaplain, as a counselor, and as a pastor, I have talked with people and have seen all 5 stages show up in that conversation. So one of the things I want to let people know is that grief is not linear. You do not have a certain time frame and grief is over. You do not have 3 days to take off from work, go to the funeral, and come back and expect everything to be okay. I still grieve my mother at times now, and she's been passed away almost 4 years. Grief is not a linear process. And so the thing I would say is to give ourselves space for it, because grief can occur at any moment and any time. So during this holiday season, if you find yourself a little angry at some point, you may want to check and see, are you missing somebody? If you find yourself a little bit in sadness, you may want to look and see, is there something going on where I'm grieving on the inside? So the first thing is to recognize grief when it occurs. Number 2, understand that grief is a part of transition. I like to cite the book, I think it's Bridges Transition, where it talks about we are all always in a process of transition. We're either before transition, we're in the transition state, or we're coming out of transition. We're either before transition, in the transition state, or coming out of transition. Before transition simply means everything is A-okay and something's going on. Then we hit the event. Whatever that event is that causes a change within us. Maybe it is a loved one passing away. Maybe it is a loss of job. But we hit that moment where we have the shock, the anger, the grief, and so on. But then we have what we call the transition time. It is that time where we're learning how to reorder life. It is that time when we're trying to figure out, how do we continue to live with that loved one who's passed away? How do we provide for our families after that job layoff has occurred? How do I live when there's something going on in my health and I need somebody to assist me? How do I live? That is the question that we're answering in that transition state. And that transition state can take a long time. It just depends on where we are. But understand that is the part where we learn to figure out what we do. I look at one of my transition states. I think about when my mother was alive. One of the things I liked about her was she would fix me spaghetti, one of my favorite meals. Spaghetti with the big meatballs. She made big meatballs. It wasn't these little meatballs. It was these big balls were like this big. And because I grew up with that, I thought that was how you were supposed to make spaghetti. As a matter of fact, when I went over somebody's house and they had regular meatballs, I thought they weren't making spaghetti right. Because you're supposed to have big, giant-sized meatballs. Understand that as her son, I can no longer have the spaghetti with the meatballs. It's not the way she would fix it. And so I miss her. And that's part of my grief. Also understanding as part of my transition state, I used to talk to her almost every day. Part of my transition was learning how to order life without being able to pick up the phone and dial her number and say, how you doing? It's real interesting how grief shows up at several times too. You remember when we had the big storm, when the hurricane came through and was knocking things out. I was preparing stuff for my family and then grief hit me. Why did grief hit me? Because as her oldest son, I was the one who would always check on her. I thought about the fact that, okay, there's a hurricane coming. I'm either being sure her house is safe or I'm bringing her to my house. And so it was those things. They hit. It's not linear when we're in transition, but we learn how to walk in the transition in the midst of that loss. So during the holiday season, it's often a time of transition. We have to get used to that loved one not being there. But that brings us to item or suggestion number 3. And I read this about this one time, and number 3 says, set a place of honor at the table. I don't know how many of you get together as family members, you sit down and you have the big table, you have the turkey, the ham, the dressing, so many things. One of the interesting things that I heard about is setting a place of honor at the table for that loved one who is no longer physically with us. Because there are some cultures, and I actually believe this to some degree also, that saying that that person is always alive and always present. We talk about how there are saints interceding for us while we're down here on earth. We talk about that in the book of Hebrews. But setting a place of honor does this. It allows us to acknowledge the presence of that loved one and what they meant in our lives. It also allows us to acknowledge that they're still there. Hopefully it's one of the saints interceding for us, praying for us, and watching over us. So we set a place of honor at that table to say, Mama, I honor you and remember you. Daddy, I honor and remember you. Sister, brother, son, daughter, friend, or whatever else. Setting a place of honor is a way that we can acknowledge during the holidays our loved ones. Number 4, and a lot of us do this one anyway. Tell the stories. Tell the stories about our loved one. My family likes to tell stories. And as I was thinking about this, I thought about a story about my brother-in-law, George. You know, George was about 5'5" and weighed maybe 150, but you couldn't tell him he didn't weigh 220. He always walked around talking about how he weighed 220 and would flex his muscles. And talk about how he would lift his nieces up in the air and everybody else. Well, George also had interesting sense of humor. And one day, we were having this family gathering down by wherever we have it, down near the lake or wherever else. And we're all sitting there in the midst of family gathering, and we had this chocolate cake. And my family knows I love chocolate cake. I love it very much. And I believe this was, I can't think of the baker's name right now, but it was a very good chocolate cake. So it was extra good. And so everybody else loved this chocolate cake. And we were getting down to the last piece of cake was there. So, you know me. I'm headed for a beeline to go get this last piece of chocolate cake. Well, there's this cute lady that I happen to be married to. Apparently, she had that idea also. So she went and she beat me to this last piece of chocolate cake and got it and put it on her plate. Needless to say, I was a little bit upset, but I was like, I can work my way out of this. Let me get my sweet talking lines together. Let me walk up to her and say, honey, you know I love you so much. It's a blessing to be married to you. I just really, really love you. And so, you know, I'm trying to throw it on thick a little bit on, see if she would give me some of this chocolate cake. I had some intention in mind. So she had this cake in her hand. She was not following for my lines. And so she was preparing to take her fork and put it in this cake. When all of a sudden this big old hand goes into this plate, grabs the cake, picks it up, and little 220-pound, 5'6" George does this, and puts it in his mouth. Y'all know my wife. She turned around. She tried not to say a few words that we shouldn't say as good church people. She looked at him and said, what? And you know me, I'm looking at him and what? And he's eating the cake and he's running away laughing. Having a good time. Stories like that bring about good memories. What are the stories that you have with your loved ones? What are those things that can bring you joy? What are the things that you can bring memories? Good and even the tough ones. Because it's in those stories that we remember that these people walked life with us. Amen. They walked life with us. Brings us to point number 5. Understand that we have those memories still to guide us. I remember one of those times when I would talk with my mother, and this was back when I was an engineer. And I was debating about going to seminary. You know, I feel a call to ministry, but I don't know if I want to do the work. That's really what it is. And I was saying to something to the fact that, Mama, if I go to seminary because I'm working, it's going to take me 7-8 years to get this done. That's a long time. Mama, I don't know if I want to do all that. And I'm talking to her about that, and then Mama says something nice and profound to me. She goes, son, you know, if you're blessed, you're going to live 7 or 8 more years anyway. You might as well do something with it. Which is how I ended up in seminary. But the interesting thing about that is even though she's no longer physically with me, I can still recall on those memories sometimes to get guidance on what Mama might want me to do. In the children's message today, our children recited different things that they learned from different places. Those memories continue to live with us. My son talked about how his grandmother said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The interesting thing about that, 20 or 30 years from now, he's going to run into a difficult situation, and that memory is going to flash back in his mind, and it's going to help him to be able to walk through something that he might not have been able to walk through otherwise. Understand that our loved ones are still with us in our memories. And then I'm I'm going to close with this thought. In the holiday season, when everybody seems so joyous around us, but some of us are feeling sad, when we're feeling sad, let us remember one thing. Serving others brings joy.
Amen.
Serving others brings joy. I notice that our bottle for outreach ministry is now empty from the funds we collect all year. Why? Because it is now the time that we're taking the money that we placed in here all year that we use to go and bless families. Serving others brings joy. My encouragement for anybody who's feeling sad, who's feeling depressed, who feels like they're having a difficult time getting hope or getting out of bed, get out of bed, find somebody in need, and serve them. The reason why serving others brings joy is because God designed us that way. God did not give us our gifts, our talents, our money, our blessing, and everything just to hoard on ourselves. But he gave it to us so that we can bless other people. I remember, I think it might have been the first or second year when my kids came to my home. And we had picked out a family from a church. And we went and shopped, bought them gifts, and other things like that. And I remember it was a cold night, too, when it was a cold night. And those of y'all who know me, I don't like to be out in the cold. We went out in the cold. We went to this family's house, knocked on the door, and presented them with gifts. There was nothing like seeing the joy, especially on those kids' faces. Those kids who were wondering whether they were going to have a Christmas, whether they were going to have clothes, whether they were going to be able to have some things to play with. And yet, my family, my children, were willing to give up some of what they would get to bless others. Who knows what difference we make in the lives of others when we serve. So my encouragement is, whenever you're feeling down, look for an opportunity to serve. Because as you give out of what God has given you, and you bless somebody else, God will give so much more to you and me. Amen? Amen. Just thought I'd share those thoughts. Amen. Please be in prayer during this holiday season and look out for those who aren't necessarily cheerful for a variety of reasons, and share some light, love, and joy, however you share it, however God blesses you with. I stand up in a pulpit. I like to say Tristan is the comedian. We share our love in different ways, but we both share. Amen? Amen. My daughter's a giver. She shares in different ways. So however you share, do that. Amen? Amen. All right. At this time, I guess we will prepare ourselves.